Highland Park in Rochester, New York is situated atop a glacial moraine, overlooking the beautiful Genesee River Valley, the Lake Ontario Plain, and in the distance, the peaks of the Bristol Hills. In the late 19th century, the land was a part of the world-famous Mount Hope Nurseries. Its owners, George Ellwanger and Patrick Berry, donated almost 20 acres to the city of Rochester for its first public park. Highland Park was designed by Frederick Law Olmsted and opened in 1890. It is a masterwork of design, an arboretum with the world's largest collection of lilacs, the site of the annual Lilac Festival, and an iconic landscape of Rochester. Highland Park is a work of art for everyday use. It offers fresh air, sunshine, and the multi-sensory delights of nature. It is also a cultural space, which reflects the civic ideals of its creators. It is a common ground of uncommon beauty for all to enjoy, equally and altogether, irrespective of life circumstances. The story of Highland Park is fundamental to Rochester's history and remains relevant as we continue to build a healthy community with social equity, hope, and prospects for all.
Hi, my name is Eric Logan.
And I want to share with you the story of Highland Park, a place that has, for me, been special ever since I moved to the Rochester area. This is the story of Highland Park. Late in the 19th century, Rochester's horticultural industry was an important source of plants and seeds for the expansion and increasing mechanization of agriculture all across the U.S., as well as for the domestic landscapes of new urban and suburban housing development. Two Rochester nurserymen in particular, George Ellwanger and Patrick Berry, became nationally prominent horticulturists who played an important role in the nation's and Rochester's landscape development.
With Highland Park, it's very interesting because it's actually was at one point part of America's largest plant nursery in the 19th century. Originally founded by George Ellwanger and Patrick Berry in 1840, they started on a small 7-acre plot of land and quickly grew the company within 20 years to be over 400 acres and shipping plants worldwide. They're certainly unique because as early as 1846, they did design their nursery grounds to almost be a park, and they actually had a section of the nursery that was supposed to be like a park with winding paths and overgrown areas of trees and flowers and creeping vines and whatnot.
Ellwanger and Berry championed the cause of public parks as an important civilizing institution of American society and offered land for Rochester's first park. George Ellwanger selected the site for the park, a place that he visited daily to enjoy the view, and named it Highland Park. Ellwanger and Berry donated the land, funded the construction of the signature pavilion at the highest point of the park, and set the terms for the development as a landscape designed and maintained at the highest level for the people of Rochester. By the time of the dedication of the park and its children's pavilion on September 29, 1890, Patrick Berry had died, and George Ellwanger was too ill to attend the ceremony, but his son delivered his prepared remarks.
I welcome you all, and the whole city also, to this commanding elevation, where I have been in the habit of coming almost daily for nearly 40 years. From this high vantage ground, I have often asked myself the question, where have nature and art, God's handiwork and the skill of man, combined so many elements of beauty, of prosperity and happiness? Though I have looked upon it so many times, the scene always possesses the old power to please. It always charms the eye and rests the mind. Believing that the attractions of nature excite and develop the best feelings of everyone, my late associate in business, Mr. Berry, and I have desired this good city of Rochester should possess forever this spot with its pure air, extended views of unsurpassed natural scenery, a fountain throwing a jet of water high in the air, and a broad sweep of meadowlands sloping away from it to the distant southern hills. Though the grounds around the structure are now in the rough, they will soon be planted with trees, shrubs, and flowers, and it is my wish and intention that they shall become every year more and more attractive. affording to all, more especially to the children of the city, a healthful and agreeable place of recreation. I, therefore, on behalf of my late associate and myself, hereby dedicate the pavilion to the children of the city of Rochester.
The Rochester Parks Commission hired Frederick Law Olmsted, the preeminent park advocate and designer. Olmsted had co-designed Central Park in New York City, designed the Buffalo Park System, the first municipal park system in the country, as well as the Emerald Necklace in Boston. He led the campaign to protect Niagara Falls, our first state park, and headed the first Yosemite Commission. He was the site planner for the Great White City, the 1893 World Columbian Exposition in Chicago, which was the key event in the City Beautiful movement. Olmsted was at the pinnacle of his career when he came to Rochester to design Highland Park.
He is often pointed to as the father of landscape architecture as we know it in the United States. He had a penetrating way at looking at things, and he saw the creation of public parks in America as a great democratizing movement, if you will, to create these joyful, beautiful, pastoral public spaces for everyone to recreate in. And he would, I'm paraphrasing, but regardless of class, religion, or racial makeup, that these were places for everyone, for all Americans, including immigrants, of course, to come together to exercise, to take in the fresh air, and to seek some relief, especially from our crowded cities.
Olmsted's design for Highland Park takes full advantage of the glacial moraine on which it's sited to create complex landforms, graceful paths and spaces, and dramatic views. The highest point of the park, above the existing reservoir, was further elevated for and by a 3-story round pavilion designed by the architectural firm of Shepley, Rutan and Coolidge. It was the focal point of the design, an overlook in the park, and a landmark on the skyline. Olmsted described it in a letter.
Any pavilion placed on the knoll northeast of the reservoir will be a very conspicuous object. It will be the center of attraction for the park. All roads and walks will lead to it, and it must necessarily be an affair for the whole public. The pavilion is to be a structure of great prominence, very public, much visited, and observed. It will be the crown of the park.
Olmsted's design emphasized the view to the countryside south of the city. He wrote,
"We pointed out that the special value of the site to the public lay in the eminence of its central parts above the surrounding country, more especially the country southward, and that a good collection of trees, if the trees were allowed to grow to their full natural height, would interrupt the view and so destroy the advantages of the site as a place of outlook. For this reason, we advised that, instead of the general arboretum, a collection limited to shrubs should be formed on this ground."
As designed by Olmsted, the park's world-famous lilac and hydrangea collections, along with other low-growing species, are planted on the hillside above Highland Avenue to preserve the view from the overlook.
Frederick Law was truly a visionary. You can see it as you walk throughout the park. It's phenomenal how you go from one section of the park to another and you have a totally different viewscape. So while he probably wasn't the top plantsman of the day, he hired people like Barney Slavin and Laney, who did tremendous work in the park laying out individual plants. But what Olmsted did was laid out areas and viewscapes. For instance, he planted the lilac hill with plants that were low enough so that they could be seen over from the overlook. As you walk through the Pinetum, you'll walk into valleys where you really can't see anything but the valley you're in. He did a really interesting job laying out the walks through the park. You had to have some kind of vision to realize that a tree that's 6 foot tall when you put it in is going to be 80 feet, and not only that, you're going to have a huge spread on that tree. So one of the things that happens in horticulture sometimes is people don't space stuff well, don't think about what a tree is going to look like when it grows up. Myself, I always look at the park's perspective as not being somebody's front yard, but being a long-term process. You got to think in the 50 and 100-year thought process rather than what it looks like the day you put it in.
Olmsted's influence in Rochester extended beyond the design of Highland Park. He recommended the development of a whole park system to include lands along the Genesee River, now Genesee Valley Park, and Seneca Maplewood Parks. Rochester is one of only 4 cities to have an Olmsted-designed park system. Highland Park remains a horticultural showcase and a masterpiece of landscape architecture.
So over the years, the park has had a stamp of many different horticulturalists working in the park. There's numerous horticultural collections in the park. Some of them are phenomenally world-class. The collection of lilacs is second to none. The Rose Hollow is a really beautiful area to see, many different prunus and rose species throughout that area. One of the hidden gems of the park is the pinetum. Originally 109 species of evergreens were put into the pinetum, but there's many, many more now. It's one of the most interesting features in the park, and people don't recognize just how many different evergreens are here, and from a worldwide status, we're a substantial arboretum here.
Highland Park was a success from the beginning and has expanded, commencing with the Goodman Street extension between Highland and Elmwood Avenues. In 1907, the 40-acre Warner Tract was added, providing a continuous green connection between Highland Park and Mount Hope Cemetery. Robinson Drive between Mount Hope and South Avenues is named for Charles Mulford Robinson, a Rochester native, an influential writer and proponent of the City Beautiful movement. Highland Park was always a focus of public events, starting with spontaneous crowds attracted to the lilacs in bloom every May. In 1908, this was formalized as the Lilac Festival, a signature event in Rochester. In 1911, the conservatory, a Lord and Burnham greenhouse, was built to display plant collections year-round. It was dedicated to the memory of Park Commissioner Alexander Lamberton. In 1916, the Rochester Garden Club donated the Poets' Garden, featuring spring wildflowers in a woodland setting, and benches inscribed with quotes from Shakespeare. The Highland Bowl was constructed as a WPA project in 1937. It has been a beloved performance space for memorable programs and renowned stars, including opera singer Renee Fleming, bass baritone singer and actor William Warfield, and even my band, under new management, has had the opportunity to play at this unique venue. In 1941, the statue of Frederick Douglass was moved to the Highland Bowl from downtown. In 1951, the Warner Castle was added. The site, with its distinctive sunken garden, was designed by Rochester's most prominent landscape architect, Alling de Forest. Highland Park was built according to Olmsted's design. However, its essential element, the Children's Pavilion, which stood for 73 years, was demolished in 1963. The open-air pavilion drew people from near and far to experience the panoramic views of the park and the countryside, and to connect with the nature that surrounded them. Efforts have begun to reconstruct the Children's Pavilion as the apex of the park. Children were especially drawn to the pavilion, and it remains a high point in the memory of those who experienced it.
I open a lot of meetings with asking people, what's your favorite memory from your childhood? And by far, when I ask that question, I say, how many of you did it relate to nature? Almost all the hands go up in the room.
Well, basically, as kids, and going back to the late 40s, I would say the Children's Pavilion was a big thing, because you climb all the way to the 3rd floor and you look out forever.
It was, you ran up the steps and you got to one level, and you ran around, and then you ran up the steps again to this next level, and the same thing until you got to the top. And that was, as I said, that was fun. Then you'd walk all the way around to see what you could see from the different points of view.
You know, I mean, you could basically see Canisius Lake. That was probably one of the biggest thing, and then getting chased out because we were too noisy. That's what being a kid is.
As the Lilac Festival grew in attendance and new demands were placed on the park, Monroe County maintained the integrity of the park's original historic landscape by annexing vacant property south of Highland Avenue as an expansion area. In the 1980s, this addition to the park was developed as a festival site and has become an area for special events, memorials, and other uses in a beautiful outdoor setting. The Vietnam Veterans Memorial, the AIDS Memorial Garden, the Victims' Rights Memorial, and the Workers' Rights Memorial provide 20th century spaces of honor and remembrance. The Nature Playground, built in 2018, is designed with trees and rocks and other natural materials to offer a welcoming space for children to experience the fun and adventure of playing outside. While these additions were made with contemporary influences, they are rooted in the history, tradition, and heritage of Highland Park. It continues to grow and evolve, but never loses its essence as a nurturing, peaceful place of natural beauty where all are welcome.
So when you're in Highland Park and you see people looking at what's the name of this tree, I've never seen anything like this before, I like to think there's a sort of Ellwanger and Barry connection there, because this is exactly what they had envisioned when they were making the case for Rochester to have a park as early as 1847. They wanted people to walk through groves of trees and flowers and ask questions and learn about what these plants were.
Going back to Olmsted, his vision was to provide a space for people to escape from the urban environment.
It's a living collection, and the trees that are big next to me now, someday they'll pass and new trees will be in that collection. Highland Park is forever. So we try to keep this collection intact and forever growing.
Highland Park is a living record of local history, from its glacial origins, its 19th century development, as a horticultural showcase, a public park, and a masterwork of design by Frederick Law Olmsted, to its many 20th century additions. It is a unique place, man-made of natural beauty for all of us to use every day for enjoyment, healing, and inspiration.